Looks like we're live.
Yep. You're live. I'm showing you.
It's buffering. Are you seeing me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We've got a couple more minutes. We're gonna hold off just a little bit. I know we had a lot that wanted to join us this afternoon, so we're live. We're ready to go. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes until then. So, hello. We're working in our classroom today that they decided to refurbish, so it looks pretty bleak in here right now, but there's a lot more room here than there is over there in my office, so that's why we're out here today. Who all's on there? You can tell me.
25 people right now.
Is that right? Okay, so feel free to jump in and comment if there's something I'm leaving out, something that's not making sense to you. I don't know how well this is going to work. I use my phone a lot when I'm doing service. I even check my needle bar height with my phone. I don't know, I get a little bit older, my eyes aren't as good, and I've got a pretty good phone here and it works pretty well. So I'll kind of demonstrate how I do that with my phone. Either the phone or my trusty magnifying glass.
What's the topic for today?
Today's topic, we're going to, in real time, time the hook needle. Okay? I've had several people this week that brought their machines in that have tried to time their machine, and we're not real successful with it. A couple of them were close. Another one was worse probably than it was when it started. But one of the things we need to be able to determine is whether we need to time your hook. And the simple answer to that in most cases is no. The hook is not going to move on its own. Now, that doesn't mean it won't. Nothing's ever 100%. If it does move, I generally have no idea why it's moved. Usually there's had been no accident or anything that's been admitted anyway.
How do you know that the machine needs to be timed?
That's what we're going to look at. That's a good question, and that's what we're going to look at. If it looks right, you don't need to time it, right? So we need to know what that looks like when it is correct. One thing I wanted to do also was to kind of show you what the hook actually is. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. The big chrome piece here in the front where your bobbin goes in, that's called your hook assembly. I got good light here. So that's what we're going to look at, and I wanted you to see how these hooks are manufactured so that you can understand the importance of maintaining this part of your machine, this device. It's actually two pieces here. The outside is held onto the shaft, the lower shaft of your machine, and when the shaft of the machine turns, the outside of that hook assembly rotates, and that little point right there is your hook. Go ahead, can you zoom in there a little bit? There you go. Pretty good picture. Can you see that okay? Okay.
Can bad timing cause loops or eyelashing?
Probably not. But let's get into this a little bit further, and we'll try to answer those questions as we go. So anyway, back to the hook itself. I'm going to go ahead and take this apart. Now, I don't normally take hooks apart. but it's kind of interesting to see. There's 3, 4, 5, 6 screws that you can take out to open this hook up. And I'll go ahead and take these out. And normally I would do this over a magnetic dish so that the screws can just fall in the dish. So bear with me a second here. There's one out.
This is only for educational purposes. This is not to be done by the normal person, correct?
Well, I don't...
Taking this out.
Yeah, I don't normally take the hook apart. You should normally need to do that. But I think by seeing how this is made will give you a better appreciation to why and how important it is to maintain this. Particularly keeping it clean and oiling. Gammill recommends at this point to oil your hook with every bobbin change. I think that's a good idea. But when you put your oil in, when we're talking about a drop of oil, if you're doing it every bobbin change, make it a small drop. Don't overdo it, because the more you put in there that doesn't actually get used, just kind of ends up making a mess. Put one more screw here. Some of these are tight. There we go. Okay, so these pieces only held the 2 parts together, and you can see how that can come apart. So this little channel right here, or this little protrusion, rides in the channel on the other half, like so. So this piece is held stationary by the hook retaining bracket. I'll show you that here in a little bit, while the other piece rotates around. So what you're oiling is this little race right here, this little channel that this piece rides on. Okay? This is also where you may get a piece of thread or some lint get caught as this is rotating and lock your machine up. I'm sure some of you have seen that before and had your machine locked up. It doesn't take much. This is a very close tolerance of this fit, and just a simple thread getting in between that channel there will lock these 2 pieces up, which will lock your machine up. Okay? So that's why it's important. Try to keep the lint stuff from building up, and also to make sure that you oil that hook. And of course, when you oil the hook, so your needle's going to be up. So you're going to put a drop of oil right on that little spot right there. And look, I'm just going to do a small drop. That's more than enough. If I turn the hand wheel, you can see the 2 pieces rotating on each other. One stationary, the other rotating, distributing that oil. Okay, super. So that kind of explains a little bit about the hook and why it's important to oil that. So how do I know if I need to time my machine? Well, there's a process to this. The very first thing that you're ever going to do if you suspect you have a timing issue, good advice, put a new needle in. Most of you do that on your domestic machines. If you start breaking threads or you start having stitch issues, first thing you do is put a new needle in it. It's the same thing with your Gammill. First thing you do is put a new needle in it. With that being said, you need to make sure that the needle's in correctly. Also, I don't know if many of you know, but there's a little hole right up here above the screw where you tighten the needle up. This little hole goes all the way through the needle bar. And if your needle is all the way up where it's supposed to be, you shouldn't be able to see through that hole. See what I mean? You can see needle up in there. If you can see through that hole above that screw, your needle's not all the way up. So you need to make sure that your needle's all the way up. I'm also going to put my needle in at a slight angle. Let me grab a magnet real quick. And I want to thank Martha and Doug are here with me today, helping me out with this. Dougie and kind of keep an eye on the comments for me. And you see when I put my needle in, that magnet isn't straight. It's slightly canted to the, I'm not going to say which direction because everybody interprets it the wrong way. What I think about when I look at this is if I was looking through the eye of the needle, I'm looking right back at that cone of thread that my bobbin winder sight is on. Just a slight angle over that way. And I think most of you have seen that as of late. That's how I put all my needles in, at that angle. So we're all the way up, we're at the proper angle, and we snug up the screw. Step one. The next step we got to do is we need to check our needle bar, make sure that it doesn't have a wore bushing. This machine here is about, I think it's almost 22 years old. It's an old, and it's got all the original bearings. If I put my needle down, I should be able to grab this bar and I shouldn't have any play. And in fact, this one I do have a little play, so I'm going to suspect I'm going to end up putting a new needle bar, or bushing in for this machine. You can see this. Martha, try to zoom in right here with the hook and the needle, kind of over in this angle.
Sorry, people.
That's okay. So if you'll notice, see what's going on? Can you see that needle moving?
I can see the table moving.
Okay.
Let's get in there where you can. Okay.
Okay. You
There.
can see kind of the needle moving away from the hook point there. This machine's going to be hard to time and to keep in time because when I set my hook point up next to the needle bar is moving. So it might be right at one stroke, and the next stroke the needle bar's moved a little bit and is going to cause me a problem. So this is something you want to look for, needle bar stability. If you feel any play, I mean, the needle bar will bend a little bit. If you've got aluminum, it'll kind of move with you a little bit. But if it's got play in it, where you can actually feel it slapping, that needs to be fixed. That's a dealer fix. Most people are not going to be comfortable putting new bushings in this. It's not that hard a job. In fact, this machine may only need a new needle bar because the needle bars wear also. So I'll try a new needle bar first and see if that doesn't correct the problem. Okay? So, once we check our needle bar stability, we're then going to check and make sure that the needle bar is positioned correctly. We always call this setting your needle bar height, and we do that by putting your needle at its absolute lowest point, where it's not going up and it's not going down. It's at its lowest point. There's a spot you can feel right there. Let's put that needle at its lowest point. Now, what's really cool with your phone, let me see this. And bear with me, I don't mean to make you nervous. Oh, my light went out. If you look in there, you can see the eye of my needle. Oh, there we go. So the first thing that I'm seeing is my needle is a little bit too far down. There we go. Oh, no, it's perfect. But you see how nice that shows with your phone? Okay? Good light, and that shows. And when Dougie had the light up here, I could see that that needle bar is perfect. If it wasn't, we're going to have to adjust it. We're going to fix that. So, this is an old Statler retrofit, and I've taken the keypad out of the way so that I can access the clamping screw that holds that needle bar. If the needle's all the way down, you can access that screw. If the needle's up, the screw's gone. So it's kind of a reminder, hey, wait a minute, that needle has to be down to its lowest point to even be able to access that screw. Take your time, wiggle it a little bit till you're absolutely sure you're at its lowest point. At that time, you can take your screwdriver and stick it in there, and you're going to loosen that clamp just a little bit. Do not unscrew that screw, or you're going to be taking this panel off and fishing it out of the bottom down here. You're just going to loosen it, which will allow your needle bar to turn and move up and down. At this point, you're simply going to, down here at eye level, you're going to get in and you're going to adjust that needle and hold it. I wonder what happened to my light here. Come on, there it goes. There we go. Can you see that now?
Wait a minute, blurred. There we go.
So I'm going to hold that. I'm going to put that right where I can see 95% of the eye of the needle. I'm going to reach up here and just snug it a little bit so that I can double check it. Might be down just a little bit. I don't want to see any of the eye above the needle, or any of the needle above the eye. There. That's what we like right there. Of course, you always double check. Run your hand wheel up and down just a little bit, just to make sure it was in the right place. Looks pretty good. So at that point, we're going to put our screwdriver up here, and we're going to give that a good snug, good and tight. Okay, so that is set our needle bar height. Okay, so now we're ready to look at the hook itself and what the timing should look like when it is correct. We always start with the needle at its lowest point. Martha, you might want to come around because you're going to be looking at the hook point. We're going to put our needle all the way down to its absolutely lowest point, and then just as we start to bring that needle up, we're going to stop when that hook point is directly behind the needle. Right there. Now, let me see what you got. Let me see this. Okay, we're going to get a little bit closer here so we can see this a little bit. There we go. So there's my hook point, and there it is hitting the needle right in the center of that scarf, that little bowed out place. It hits on the right side of the needle right in the center, and as we move it just a little bit further, you can see how it goes past in the middle of that scarf. Notice that there is no play, or that there's no gap. It's right up against that, but it's not actually touching. Okay?
Do all techs recommend the same needle bar height?
Absolutely. Yep, we always set it the same. 95% of the eye of the needle. None of the needle above the eye.
Can you show us what an out of alignment needle bar looks like?
If the height isn't correct, a lot of times what you'll see is more than the eye.
Too much light. It's shining.
Too
Yeah.
much light? Sorry.
There we go.
Can you see it? Okay. Let me move it a little bit more. Something that you might see with normal quilting. Doesn't want to move.
Got it too snug.
There we go. So can you see that you're seeing a little bit of the above the eye? Let that focus. There we go. You can see now we're seeing all the eye and then some. Now, believe it or not, this can happen simply by stitching over heavy seams in a quilt. And the funny thing about it is, you would think that that needle would get moved up, but the fact of the matter is I see more often that the needle's pulled down and we see more than the eye of the needle, like we're seeing right here. Does that help? Let's get that back to where it was. Okay. Okay. So now we're going to look at the hook. First thing we check with the hook is the hook stability. Just like the needle bar, if the needle bar moves in and out, it's going to change that relationship of that needle and the hook going past the needle there, right? If the needle bar moves, then it's not going to be consistent where it's supposed to be. The same is true if the hook moves. So you want to get in the habit, if you're going to time your machine, to grab a hold of that hook and pull straight out and push straight in. Just like your needle bar, if you feel kind of a little slap there, you've got play in that, and that needs to be fixed. The good thing of it is we don't see a lot of that, but the other good thing is it's really easy to fix. It's not a problem whatsoever. In fact, the way that we would do this, you can come over to this side, Martha. You can unplug that, it's charged. So, generally the hole's over your axle here in the back, your access for the collar that stabilizes that hook shaft. And what you do is you take the rubber plug out, and if you look straight in there and you turn the hand wheel, you'll be able to feel there's a little Allen head screw inside there on that collar. And you're going to loosen that. You're going to pull your tool out and turn to the next Allen head screw. And you can see those if you look up in there. And then you're going to loosen that second one, but you're going to leave your tool in the collar. Okay? This collar can now move up and down. So we're going to grab our hook and pull it forward, and at the same time moving that collar to the back and then snugging up both of those set screws. That takes out any end play. Now be careful when you're setting this collar back here. You don't want to press it hard against that bearing shoulder. It'll create heat. You just want it to come up against, and that's where you tighten it. And that's going to take out any play that you have in your hook. Okay? All right. Now this one doesn't need time, but here's how we do it. You might want to come on this side. Now the manual will tell you to use these access holes here. Well, I'm not even going to take them off because I don't use them. But it'll tell you to use these access holes to loosen the screws of the hook. Well, that just is a nightmare. You don't really want to do that. If you look down from the top here and turn your hand wheel, there's one of the screws. There's two of them. We're going to loosen the one. But notice I'm going to turn that screw back in just where it touches that shaft. I'm going to turn the hand wheel again. And I'm going to loosen the other one. And again, just turn that back in. I'm going to put my needle all the way down to its lowest point again, because that's where we always start. And what should happen is that hook point is at about 2 o'clock down here with the needle at its lowest point. As I continue to turn the hand wheel clockwise in its normal rotation, you're going to see the hook point come up from the side here. Here's the hook point, and it's coming up. And what I would normally tell you to do is to pull it up and then stop when that hook point is right behind your needle. And you will be able to see that better from this side, Doug. I'll get out of your way. If you're sending, if I ask you for a picture because we're not sure what you have here, this is the perspective that's going to give you the best view. I'm going to get down here a little bit closer so that you can see. And now you can see that hook point going past the needle. Now this is perfect timing. But let's say that it was over there a little bit. And notice now it's hitting at the bottom of that scarf. That's not uncommon to see that, and that's not correct. If I turn it off a little bit more, what you're going to see is it's really hitting the bottom, and it's actually hitting the needle now. Okay? So, I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm trying to get it cleared. Okay, so now that's a little bit low in the scarf. And it should be about right there. Maybe turn it up just a little bit more because I like the point of that hook to hit the right edge of that needle right in the center of that scarf. Now, if you have a hard time moving it, it could be that your screws are still a little tighter than you want to be. The reason I snug these, I don't snug them, but the reason I tighten these screws back up or turn them back into the shaft is because it helps hold everything in place. So when I move it, it stays where I put it. Try this one too. Just a little bit. There we go. Okay, so again, I'm going back with my needle to its lowest point. And just as it starts to raise, that hook point should come in behind the needle, just like so. Now, many of you aren't going to be comfortable doing this right off the get-go, so Gammill has a tool that we can use. It's called a timing tool to help us position the needle in the correct place for when the hook point is supposed to come by. So, Doug, can you grab that timing tool out of the side of my tool bag there? Okay, and make this while I put this on. Okay, so to take some of the guesswork out, we're going to use the timing tool. We need to put your needle down to its absolute lowest point. See, I'm rocking it till I get it to its lowest point. I'm going to take my timing tool, I'm going to put it on my needle bar with the blade and slide it up as far as it'll go and then snug up the little plastic screw. I'm going to remove this blade now, and that's going to allow me to raise the needle. I think it's around 5/30 seconds, something like that. It's not important that you remember the number. It's about the thickness of a nickel. But when we take that blade out, we can now come in and we can turn our hand wheel in the clockwise direction still. And that is position the needle exactly where it should be for the hook point. So I can now turn my hook point and set it right to the right side of the needle, right there. Now, not only do we want to make sure the point is going through the center of the scarf, but we also want to make sure that we don't have a big gap or that it's not pulled too far forward so that it's actually hitting the needle. We want to just move that up or down, what we need to do, and set that hook point right there. That's perfect. You see that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So once we have it set, we can take our timing tool off, and we're going to carefully rotate the hand wheel till I can get to one of those screws that hold the hook. And I'm just going to snug it up a little bit. I don't have to over tighten it right now because I always double check these things. So again, we're going to go back down. Just as we come up, we can see the hook point coming. It should come in right behind the needle, right there. And if I push in this needle, you can see that there's no gap. I can pull that away a little bit and let it rest. It's coming right up next to that hook point, but it's not actually touching it. Now, that was with the timing tool. In my opinion, the timing tool doesn't always get it perfect where it needs to be. So what I do is I time it with the timing tool first, and then I'm going to fine tune it. I'm going to loosen this screw back up a little bit. And then I'm going to fine tune it to what I feel is perfect. So again, needle down. It's going to be real close where it's supposed to be, but it actually needs to come just a little bit sooner because I like that hook point to hit my needle in the center of that scarf. So when it touches that on the right-hand side of the needle, it's at the center. And that way when it comes across, it moves down just a little bit. Again, checking your gap. Make sure there's no gap. Oh, got a little bit of a gap there. Okay. So I can pull that hook just a little bit, just out just a little bit to eliminate that. You don't want your needle or your hook hitting that needle. No clearance whatsoever. Okay? Now, another thing that will cause problems with your stitches, and it will look like it's a timing issue because it's skipping stitches, doesn't necessarily mean that your hook is off. A lot of times people like to tighten their fabric pretty tight between the rollers. And let me show you what happens there. A lot of you sew on your sewing machines, your domestic sewing machines, right? And you're just zipping through those strips just 90 miles an hour. A lot of people don't realize though, when that needle of your sewing machine goes into that fabric, your feed dogs go down and that fabric isn't being advanced. So that fabric is actually doing this, going through, even though it feels like it's nice and smooth going through. It's really not. The issue that we have with a lawnmower machine is we don't have feed dogs. We're the one feeding the machine through the fabric. So what happens is, when the needle goes into the fabric, we're still moving. Or your computer's still moving, whatever. The whole time that needle's in the fabric, the machine is still moving. So, Dougie, maybe you can see this. Back down here on the hook point, I'm going to grab the needle here at the bottom, at the point, and I am showing you what's happening when you're doing a circle, when you're quilting a circle. Here's what's going on. You notice how that needle moves around. It pulls away from the hook. It moves into the hook. As you make that circle, this is what's actually going on with your hook needle. Okay? So if we can loosen our fabric, the needle isn't responsible or doesn't have to take all of the load of that motion that we're doing. The fabric is going to give with it, and that's going to allow your needle to stay much straighter, making sure that alignment with your hook is consistent all the time. Another thing that we see that causes skip stitches, and I mentioned skip stitches because all three of the machines I did this week initially started with skip stitches. So another thing that we looked at was our thread tension, our top thread tension. What has to happen is the machine uses this hopping foot. It's very important. But if you notice, the hopping foot is timed with your needle. When the needle goes down, the hopping foot goes down, And then the needle starts to raise, the hook grabs the thread off of the needle, and then the hopping foot starts to raise, okay? So every time the needle goes down, the hopping foot compresses your fabric along with that thread, and it actually creates a small loop of thread behind that scarf. The problem with too much tension, however, is it eliminates that loop that you've created, and actually the thread stays much closer to the needle. So with the needle staying, or with the thread staying really close to the needle, and then the needle moving like so, increasing the gap, the result is skip stitches. The first thing that I ask people that have skip stitches, the very first thing I ask, 2 questions. First of all, I trick you. I tell you, I say, now you got your fabric good and tight, right? I do that for a reason. Some people will immediately say, well, yeah, I like it, I like it tight. Well, strike one. And the second thing I'm going to ask you is, how does the stitches look when it's not skipping? Generally what people will tell me is they look great. Then all of a sudden I'll get a big long stitch. Okay, what direction then is the skip? A lot of times it's when they're moving the machine away from them or going towards the pickup roller. What that is doing is pulling that needle away from that hook, along with the fact that your top thread tension is tighter than it needs to be, so that we don't get the nice loop that it should make, and the hook point goes right past it. So I'm going to post some pictures here a little later of the relationship of that hook point and that needle. So when you send me pictures, or your whoever's helping you with this, what you're going to do to send a really good picture, a very helpful picture, is to do the picture from this angle, just like we have here now, and put that hook point right up behind your needle. It may not be in the center of that scarf. It doesn't matter, because we're checking here. We need to know whether it is or not. So you're going to raise your needle and stop when that hook point is directly behind the needle, so that now you can compare where it's hitting that needle at. It should be in the center of that scarf, right up against the needle without actually touching. Like I said, a few little hints to help you do this is, first of all, make sure it's bad before you change it, before you loosen the hook. The other thing is, when you loosen the hook, turn those screws back down just a little bit so it doesn't spin willy-nilly, right? And then use your screwdriver from the top here. Don't worry about trying to go through these little holes here. Much easier to go through the top here to access those screws and to tighten those up. And you want to get them really tight. One of the ones I did this week, the lady got it really tight, or she got it set right, but she didn't have enough grip in her hands, and she had to time it. She told me she timed it 4 times and finally gave up. Okay? But I think her biggest problem was she just wasn't getting it tight enough. Okay? So those screws need to be good and snug. Once you're assured, once you look and see that that's right. But even better, if you don't have to loosen those screws, and you know that when you look here and you put that hook point behind the needle and see what you have here.
Kathy wants to know, must you use a 4.0 size needle when you adjust timing if needed?
I always use a 4.0 needle when I'm doing timing. That means in most quilting, I can get away with a 3.5. I can certainly use a 4, and I can use a 4.5. Generally, they say if you go a whole size, that you might have to retime. And you're not actually retiming it. The timing is still right. It's that gap between the hook and the needle itself. When you go to a really small needle like a 3.0, and I have it set at with a 4, I'm going to have more of a little gap between my hook point and the needle when the hook goes past, which could cause skip stitches. what aggravates it even worse, with a small needle like that, we've created a gap by putting the small needle in, but remember, we're moving the machine also while the needle's in the fabric, and the needle is deflecting. It deflects into the hook, it deflects away from the hook. It's not going to stay straight. So that's why you'll hear some people say when you're skipping stitches to put a bigger needle in the machine. Well, certainly that bigger needle is going to stay straighter. It's not going to do this near as much. Okay?
William says, mine does much better when the fabric is tight.
I would say if that's the case, then don't listen to what I said about loosening your fabric. You know, I've run machines with the fabric pretty tight too. Where you get into trouble is with the fabric too tight is if you start with a gap between the hook and needle to start with, or it's not in the center of that scarf. If it's timed perfect, you're going to get away with a lot more than you would if there's a little bit of misadjustment, okay? So I would say your machine is probably, your hook timing is probably right on. You have no gap between your hook and needle. Maybe you're running a little slower. You can get by with it if you run a little bit slower, your fabric tighter on top. But
Pat says, how many years have you done this with Gammill? Very informative for us newbies.
When did you buy your machine? When Dougie was born? That was what?
Just after.
Dougie, how old are you?
27.
Dougie's 27, so I've been working on Gammill since Martha bought hers 27 years ago. And of course, we became dealer of the Gammill equipment 18 years ago. So I've been doing it a long time. Don't have a whole lot of trouble with them. I like the reason why I'm doing this today, though, is I need you to make sure of what you have before you loosen that hook point, because there's so many things that can be wrong and simple adjustments wrong that's going to cause that. Even broken threads. You know, a lot of things can happen. It has nothing to do with your hook needle timing. So we need to check that, know what to look for, know what it's supposed to look like when it's right, so that if it doesn't look right, then you can make the adjustments that are necessary. I hope this makes sense. In my mind, it went a lot smoother. And a lot easier, but I think you'll also appreciate if you have a good cell phone, takes good pictures. Before I ever tell any of my customers to time their machine, I'm going to have them send me pictures so that I can help them make the informed decision on whether we need to make the adjustment or not. It can save you a lot of time.
Does the weight of the fabric make a difference?
Not normally. Not normally. The weight of the fabric is going to cause the needle to deflect more. A heavier fabric is going to cause the needle to move more. If the needle moves, it's changing that relationship of that hook going past the center of that scarf, right? So if you're using heavier fabrics, you want to consider going to a bigger, heavier needle to keep it straighter.
Is this why my machine breaks threads going to right to left?
That's another problem. More than likely, first question I'm going to ask you, if that's what the machine is doing, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how does the stitches look before the thread breaks? 90% of the time, thread breaks simply due to too much tension on the fabric. Tension is what breaks thread. Too much tension will break your thread. So if you're stitching and you've got really nice stitches, but you get arbitrary thread breaks, the first thing I'm going to tell you to do is loosen your top thread tension a half a turn. Keep an eye on the back of it, because as you start to loosen your top thread, you could start causing problems on the back. But if you're past the sweet spot, past tighter than it needs to be to make a good stitch, you're going to start having some problems. Either thread breaks, you could even have, like I said, we talked about skipping stitches particularly. if it's too tight and the fabric's too tight and you're moving the machine away from you, it's going to skip the stitch. Does that help? Any more questions? No?
Somebody's wanting to know, will you be doing a seminar on needle bar bushing replacements?
I'll probably work with people individually. We don't want to make everybody a Gammill technician. I want you to be comfortable with making informed decisions and make the type of adjustments that you need in order to have good stitches. Changing needle bar bushings is not something that's common. Like I said, this machine here is 22 years old, I believe. We're looking at the serial number. It's an old machine. Original needle bar, original bushings. This one looks like it's going to need a needle bar bushing. Like I said, it might even be just the needle bars wore. I'm going to try that first, see if that takes care of that play. But there's another example of things to check, however, because if I loosen my hook because it looks like I've got a gap, and then I try to retime it, and the whole time the problem was the needle bar bushing or the needle moving away from the hook because of the bushing, well, I've just added more work to the whole process. Okay? We're going to do other things here. I'll get another time slot and we'll look at some other things. I want to look at looking at both your tensioners, your intermittent tension and your rotary tension with check spring. We want to look at those things. We'll look at bobbin winder, checking your motor belt. So we've got a lot more things we're going to do. We're going to do it live, I think, rather than just videos. That way you can ask your questions. Hopefully we'll have answers, and hopefully we'll all get a lot out of it. So I appreciate your time Saturday afternoon. I hope you had a great day. And please remember to like, if you like, and share. A lot of people that aren't able to catch this right now, it will be on the Gammill timeline. I think that's what Shindy said. So it is available. If you've got any suggestions for something you would like to look at in real time, please post that. Let me know. I've made my text number available many times. You're welcome to text me. When you have a picture, I'm going to ask you for pictures. It really helps me to help solve your problem. So we'll conclude for today. I look forward to the next time we can get together, and I hope this has helped. Have a great evening.